By now, I know you've probably seen this clip. Oh, no, not that one. This one.
Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
So I wanted to take some time to talk about what this statement and this picture have to do with hunting and why ideas like this and the power to act on them make hunting less accessible. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm a wildlife ecology professor showing you how to build the wild kitchen. Okay, so you probably heard about many of the things that former President Trump said during the presidential debate with Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, there's a lot to cover in this debate that doesn't necessarily have to do with hunting, but Trump's statement and his campaign claims of what's happening in Springfield, Ohio,
They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
combined with this picture, struck me as deeply problematic, but something that I think is worth talking about in the realm of hunting and race. So this episode is about contextualizing this comment and this idea to hopefully make the hunting community more resilient to the ways that certain people are undermined. Okay, so before we begin, full disclosure on President Trump. I'm not a fan of this person. I almost never agree with what he says, and I think throughout his life he's done real harm, not only to people of color, but virtually everybody who comes in contact with him. The other thing that we have to establish from the outset is that there is no credible evidence that immigrant populations in Springfield, Ohio, or anywhere in this country are consuming the pets of so-called real Americans. There's no evidence that Haitian immigrants have moved to Springfield, Ohio by the millions and are stealing people's cats and dogs from their yard and consuming them. One of the key tactics for what seems to be the GOP's political stance, and particularly Trump's campaign, is to make outrageous claims and have a discussion about said claims, which essentially shifts the focus from other issues that are worth debating and worth discussing. And we can see that from follow-up conversations with J.D. Vance, who tries to intellectualize these just bold-faced lies and to get people to think that, oh, well, maybe there's a chance. I mean, we don't really know what's going on here. There are two equally valid points of view on this issue that are in dispute, when in fact, there really isn't. Hey folks, I just wanted to take a break and let you know that one of the best ways to get the most out of the content on this channel is to subscribe to my newsletter. Every Sunday, I give you more depth and insight into the topics I cover on Out There JCH, including thoughts and perspectives that I don't really share on this platform. The newsletter is free to sign up, and as an incentive to becoming a subscriber, I'm offering a free wild food resource guide that will help make you a more capable harvester and home cook. Just click the link in the description to sign up. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Okay, so now that we have that established, let's talk about how this statement affects the broader hunting community. I think the first thing to realize is that this trope of people outside the country coming in and having food consumption practices that are far removed from the norms of society is a very old racist trope. It's a way that Americans have weaponized xenophobia to other people who are not from their particular culture and talk about how those people over there are barbaric, are primitive, are backwards, and the like. So while the claim that Trump makes during the debate is a new thing that's been discussed during a presidential debate, it's not a new thing in American culture. As I've said and other people have said before, wild food in particular is about access and about opportunity. Now we know that rural spaces where the majority of hunting takes place is overwhelmingly controlled by white people. Moreover, the political views and perspectives of those communities tend to be very insular and a little less understanding of different cultures in that space, simply because they are more isolated and more homogenized. This country has a very long history of keeping Black folks, people of color, indigenous people out of these rural spaces that they wish to control. The entire reason why there are concentrations of people of color in urban areas is because for most of this country's history post-emancipation, the power structures have desired to keep Black people, indigenous people, and other people of color out of these spaces. And so who controls space is about who has power. Now, I talk about this a lot in the previous series and in my writings on hunting and race. So when the former president of the United States invokes a racist trope about Black people and people not from the United States that's designed to incite fear, mistrust, and suspicion, it becomes a very big deal and endangers the people who he's talking about. The Black forager, Alexis Nicole, talks about this a lot in her work and how being a Black forager is different than being a white forager. She talks a lot about the politics of food, and particularly wild food, and how living in the body that she lives in makes a practice that many white people enjoy without having to worry about their racial identity more difficult. And I couldn't agree more. I talk about the same when it comes to hunting. And I find it interesting that this image of a Black man carrying a goose across the street has been met with such vitriol. We have images of white people doing the exact same thing that is widely accepted. And so we begin to see that things are not quite the same depending on the body that you live in. And so what food's acceptable to consume and the methods that are used to acquire this food are all about what's considered normal, and the sentiments of the president, the former president, and vice presidential candidate tell us if you are a Black person who engages in the same wild food practices as white people, there's a chance that people may not accept what you're doing simply because of your identity. Okay, I can already hear in the comments, people are going to be like, what does this have to do with race? I don't care if you're Black, white, purple, if you're hunting and harvesting, I don't give a crap. Or this has nothing to do with race. Trump is talking about a very real thing that's happening, and you should be concerned about that. Why do you always have to bring this up about race? And I don't really know what to say to that other than the point of Trump's comments is to instill suspicion and to instill fear. And that's a particularly dangerous thing for Black people in the United States of America, because we have countless examples of Black folks, indigenous folks being accosted, harmed, and killed because white people are suspicious of what they're doing. And so when suspicion, outrage, and fear are used to mark people in an activity that other people of different racial identity participate in, it makes things less safe for those people who are targeted. And so now, because of President Trump's comments and presidential candidate Vance's insistence that immigrant populations are stealing people's dogs and cats and eating them, and that there is something wrong with walking around with a goose that you've harvested, that creates a general air of suspicion for all people who are suspected of being Black or being an immigrant in spaces doing the same things that white people do. And in terms of moving through the world as a hunter, I and other people have already talked about how doing so as a Black person means that you have to manage and account for people's suspicions of what you might be doing in any given space. And that's because you're not really expected to be in those spaces. As Dr. Finney's work has shown, who is represented as being emblematic of the outdoors is overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white. Now, having someone in a space who's unexpected doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be suspicious, fearful, or outraged of them being there. But when very powerful people are spreading lies and inciting fear about you in those spaces, you at least have to account for the people who are influenced by those ideas. Now, we know from the last election that over 70 million people voted for Donald Trump, which means that to some degree, 70 million people trust his judgment, listen to what he says, and believe the ideas that he discusses. And when we combine that with that spaces where people are hunting and harvesting wild food are dominated by white people, and the fact that the majority of white people in the United States of America have voted for Donald Trump in 2 elections, it would be foolish in the extreme to think that the idea and the suspicion, outrage, and fear that Trump is inciting with these comments are simply dismissed by the majority of the people that you might encounter in hunting spaces. And so that forces people like me, and it should prompt white hunters to think about what might be the outcome of someone who sees a black person or someone who they've identified as an immigrant in a community. Might they think that that black person or that person who doesn't look like them and is not from their culture be up to no good? And if that's the case, what are the possible actions that that person who might feel threatened, might feel angry, or might feel suspicious might do? And I think that's, at the very least, a legitimate line of logic that we all need to be thinking about, particularly those in the hunting community. There continues to be an ongoing discussion about the fact that hunting participation in this country has been on the decline. And the fewer hunters there are in each generation, the less resources will be made available for conservation and maintaining those spaces that many of us enjoy. One of the points that you keep hearing from hunters of color is that hunting culture in this country is not particularly welcoming, and that many of us don't enjoy the same luxury of feeling safe, accepted, and welcomed that our white counterparts enjoy. And so for mainstream organizations like Meat Eater to claim that they care about making hunting more accessible and more welcoming to all people, it becomes important for that rhetoric to be supported by actions and to speak out about how comments from the Republican nominees for president are undermining efforts to make hunting more accessible. Now, it just so happens that I have an episode on this channel that involves a goose that was hit by a car in a suburban neighborhood that I ended up harvesting. The concern that I had for my own safety and how people in my community might perceive my actions, especially since we had just moved to that area, was definitely a big deal. And the people who hit the goose and asked for our help ended up calling the authorities to see if there was something that could be done. And so as I am picking up this goose and putting the goose in the box to take it out of the street and into our backyard, the police drive by. And I absolutely had concerns and thought about, how is this going to go? Are they going to ask questions before leaping to conclusions? And it turns out that that's exactly what happened. They were very respectful. They were helpful. They did their job as police officers. But as we know from the history of this country, that doesn't always happen. And when it doesn't happen, it's disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and other people of color that are on the receiving end of the authorities jumping to conclusions and using violence. And so even though everything turned out fine in that situation, it was absolutely something that was on my mind as it was happening. So at the end of the day, I think it's really important to understand what the motivation and what the purpose of spreading lies that immigrants are eating pets and the purpose of vilifying a Black man carrying a wild goose is. And that is to incite suspicion, outrage, and fear of a particular group of people that are being used for political gain. Again, there is no credible evidence that millions of immigrants are coming into this country and eating people's cats and dogs. There's also nothing inherently wrong with someone carrying a goose that they've harvested, so long as they are in compliance with the law. And there are even situations that we could all think of where someone might be harvesting wild food for reasons that are outside of the law, but may be necessary for them to stay alive. We know that power is overwhelmingly held by white people in this country, and that power for the entire history of the United States of America has been used to marginalize so that other people stay in control of certain spaces. And quite frankly, Trump's comments put Black people, Indigenous people, immigrants, people of color in danger by inciting racist ideas and calling people to act on those ideas. As a Black hunter, how I'm perceived in spaces is something that's always on my mind. And when people are fed ideas about how someone who looks like me may be up to no good, it absolutely makes things less safe. So as the hunting season approaches, how people are understanding Trump's comment and how they might react is definitely going to be a point of concern that prior to this comment was less of a concern. And so if you're a Black hunter, an Indigenous hunter, a person of color in these spaces, this is a reminder to be aware of your surroundings, who you're with, and what you're going to do if someone decides that you're up to no good. If you're a white hunter, I think it's really important for you to combat these ideas if broader participation in hunting is something that you'd like to see. The brilliant author James Baldwin wrote in his amazing book, The Fire Next Time, "A civilization is not destroyed by wicked people. It is not necessary that people be wicked, but only that they be spineless." Thanks for listening, and good luck this hunting season.